All right, moving on. I don't know if you saw. I was so excited. I saw the Sunday Times front page, below the fold, but front page. Podcast surge, but producers fear Apple isn't listening. And I went, oh, maybe we're lucky because we have a good relationship with Steve. And
I broke my head on my desk when I saw that article.
Oh, you're a podcaster. We're all podcasters. So, according to this, I think By the way, Marco had a great takedown at marco.org, Marco Arment, who makes a podcast app and is a podcaster himself. And because he makes a podcast app, I think he's very connected to podcasters. First of all, he said, for some reason, when the New York media, especially the New York Times, talks about podcasting, what they really mean is NPR. Or the NPR spin-offs like Serial and, Gimlet, and all these guys who came from All Things, This American Life and Planet
traditional
Money.
metric-based advertising companies.
Yeah. He in the Times, and the article is written by John Herman. He says that Apple had a meetup, brought in the big podcasters. Were any of you there? Just out of curiosity.
No.
I'm a podcaster to do that.
Was Steve Austin there? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. I think this probably is a misunderstanding because Apple talks to podcasters all the time, and we've been there. And but they say that the big podcasters that Apple brought in interviews. This is the Times. Interviews with over 24 podcasters and people inside Apple reveal a variety of complaints. The podcasters say they are relegated to wooing a single Apple employee for the best promotion. That is true. Not a problem, but that is true. It's Steve that does it all, right? We love Steve.
But I mean, like, that's not so. Like, I hate when they mention Apple employees because they never do it in context. That's not unique to podcasts. Apple, as part of Eddie Q's organization, although the App Store ones have moved to Phil Schiller, they have editors, and they've always had them. It's for movies, it's for music, it's for podcasts, it's for apps, it's for iBooks. They're human curators whose job it is to sift through all this stuff and sort of try to build themes.
And it's different in every country. So Steve Wilson and James Bogg, his boss, are in the U.S., but every country has its own. It's an editorial team. It's the same for the App Store. And there used to be more.
It's just one guy got transferred, and I don't believe they've replaced him. I mean, I guess the whole story lacks. If you know Apple and you read this story, you just want to, again, break your desk with your head.
But Marco makes a point, and I think
yeah, exactly.
Marco really makes an excellent point. Apple's actual role in podcasting, be careful what you wish for, is we don't want Apple to turn iTunes and the podcast apps into the App Store. He says, you don't. He says, trust me. You don't want that. Podcasts are like blogs. It's an open standard. There are many different podcast platforms. No, I don't think any of us want Apple to become a gatekeeper, to do metrics, to pry into our listeners' lives and personal information. I don't think Apple wants to do that. To get analytics, to do monetization. Marco says, completely decentralized, free, fair, open, and uncontrollable by any single entity, and that's the way it is. We don't want to turn it into what the web is turned into, which is an ad tech ridden cesspool of advertising.
Yeah. When I read that article, when I read about complaints that there's just one guy that we have to deal with, I was reading, we don't have the ability to leverage our really expensive marketing and publicity department to heavily lobby and or pay to influence somebody to give us a better placement above other people. It's kind of good that there is sort of a secret process by which certain shows get promoted and certain shows don't. And isn't it better to know that just some 12-year-old kid who started a podcast that's just good according to some certain human beings gets to be right up there front and center to find a new audience, and the brand new Honey Nut Cheerios Bee podcast is getting 18 listeners and no promotion, just despite how much money General Mills is putting into the promotion of it.
Like Laura just got Laura started, a year ago, and it was one guy, a 30-minute show, and it just got picked up as a TV deal, and it was one of the new podcasts of the year on iTunes, and he's competing with the biggest producers. I mean, I can understand, because I used to work in analytics, why a lot of companies they've been sort of, what's the right word, fattened up on this market of, we'll give you exact numbers and you'll know who played and how many people this, and then they can game those systems. They can bid and they can create these incredibly complex algorithms to do. But that is usually good for giant aggregators. That is seldom good for people, and you sort of have to figure out what you want out of this. And
well, I think it's back into the same complaint that we see with the App Store. You know, people were like, "Well, but they didn't give us everything. They didn't give us everything we asked for." You know,
No, I don't want them to give us anything.
No,
I mean,
the whole thing is they mostly stay out.
It's a directory.
Of all the things that Apple does, this is the thing that they stay out of. You know, they do not get into it. They're not taking it away from, because I don't want them to take 30%. I don't want to have rules about what kind of advertisers I can run. I don't want to have all of the things that would come with more help.
Yeah, Marco says that. Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, I don't want to have to not use naughty words if I choose to use naughty words. Right. I don't want to have to not talk about topics that are gross. Right. According to
and I think that this is part of why Apple has. I think this is part of why Apple has stayed away from it, to allow people to do whatever they're going to do with it, and within a very wide set of rules, just stay out. Has just basically stayed out of the way of the podcasters. And I think that they've created a great platform that people are making money at. And maybe not everyone maybe it's not as easy as everyone would like it, but there is a way to climb up there.
Well, so there's, sounds like in this article, there's two things that the whoever these people were that met with Apple wanted. One was metrics. Don't want that. Apple's not the company to provide metrics. And that's just not the way or analytics about our audiences. And Apple could, I guess, do that because a lot of people play back podcasts through iTunes. But it's no longer the vast majority.
They wouldn't anyway, because the podcast itself collects no data, so they would have to link it with device data that they know about you, which is the last thing that Apple would ever want to do. They've gone to great measures to decouple those kinds of things.
And Apple, I just want to tell you, we don't want you to do that either. We're not asking you to do that. And then maybe have some sort of subscription service for podcasts. No, there's plenty of good ways to do that. You don't need to do that with Apple. And finally, I guess what they're saying is it should be easier for us to promote ourselves to Apple. And I think it's fine to have Steve decide what he likes and promote it. And that's fine. I don't, the one thing I think has always bugged me is the top podcast lists, because I think people think that means the most subscribed to podcasts, and it's not. Never has been. It's the most subscribed to in iTunes this week list. It's like a Billboard chart, and so it doesn't count total listens by any means.
But I think in some ways it measures a certain trend.
Ballistics.
Of people going towards something. Ballistics. Because otherwise it would be right now, it'd be This American Life would be #1 all the time.
Well, it is all the time because they do
they keep on adding.
Yeah. Because they play a trick, actually, to get on #1 on there. We don't, I'm sure they have a lot of listeners. But when we release a new podcast, it often goes to #1 and then slowly goes back down. Does that mean people are unsubscribing? No. It means there are the ballistics are different. There are fewer new subscriptions. In fact, the largest older podcasts will not be on those lists because we don't get as many new subscribers because everybody subscribes. Anyway, I don't want to sound whiny on this. I'm not. I'm very happy with how it works. And just remember, Apple's not the only player. There's Stitcher. And there's a guy at Stitcher you call. Yeah. There's a lot of these.
The super important thing is that the Apple, whatever system Apple has created, Apple has not created a system where you cannot have a successful and sustaining podcast if you are not being helped by Apple with good placement and good positioning. And that means that whatever system they've got is working really great.
Yeah. It's complete.
Well, and there's a concept, of using Twitter, using Facebook, building a web page.
Yeah, you have to promote yourself.
Old-fashioned marketing. Yes. That they don't have to hand it to you. There's a lot of tools out there to engage your audience.